conversation and the opportunity to speak tonight. Yeah, look forward to meeting some of you afterwards and forming some new relationships and refreshing old ones. As an introduction, I'm the Managing Director of Core Lithium. We're an Adelaide-based company, and so we've got an operations office in Darwin, which is close to what we expect to be Australia's next new lithium mine and Australia's next new lithium production facility. As we and the company and contribute to the global lithium industry and become part of the global EV supply chain. I'll ask you to click through a couple of slides, please. There's just a couple of pages of legals, so just click through those, please. There we go. So, now we're all here because we're interested in EVs, and so is the rest of the world. And over the last decade, there's been an exponential growth in EV demand and EV sales. And last year was a record of EV sales around the globe. There's a really interesting dynamic in the context of COVID globally. And I think we're sort of starting to experience some of that now, where people haven't been travelling, but they've been sort of investing, if you like, investing in a new car. But the sales of EVs globally, and particularly in Europe, have really outstripped conventional cars through 2020, and it's almost been a global pivot point, if you like, between both in EVs, but also I think the community's attitude towards the environment, emissions, and particularly in Europe and in China, governments looking at investing in and sponsoring global renewed economic growth post-COVID, but with low emission targets, and obviously sort of EVs and lithium batteries have a key role to play in that. And even more significantly, towards the end of last year, with a change of president in the US, is that really the US economy now is expected to be looking to a low emission future. And even though Tesla's been raging ahead of the pack in EV sales, outside of California, the EV sales themselves haven't been that high. So, but in the context of a new president and a new view on sort of emissions globally, is expected that then the US joins China and Europe in accelerated demand for and sale of EVs, and therefore lithium batteries, and therefore all the materials that go into lithium batteries, including lithium. Next slide. I think we all believe and have been following the sort of increase in demand for EVs and for lithium batteries. For me, it's been the last 5 years. I'm sure for some of you it's been much longer. But in about 5 years ago, there was a recognition that that global growth in EVs was increasing rapidly, and so the world started to think about what we will need to build those batteries. So there was a rush of new supply that came on, and as that supply came into the market, that new supply came into the market, the prices decreased. A little bit boring, a bit economics, but what's happened since 2019 is the lithium price, even though car sales were increasing slowly, the lithium price actually decreased quite significantly, and a couple of lithium producers actually went bust in the last 12-18 months because the price was so low. Both Australian lithium miners, but also lithium producers and other participants in the lithium supply chain globally, because the prices essentially went too low. What we've experienced in the last 6 months is, with that that limiting new supply, limited investment in new supply, as does happen in commodity cycles, is now there isn't enough supply, and particularly in the context of the growth through 2020 in car sales, EV car sales, there's not enough new supply coming to market, and therefore lithium prices are really increasing quite aggressively over the last 6 months. And in China, the lithium carbonate price is increasing like 40% in the last 3 months, and the lithium spodumene price, which is what we produce here in Australia, the raw material, that price has increased about 30% in the last 3 or 4 months. So I'm glad to say it's on again, if you like. Next one, please. The EVs in a global sense, in a sort of global large-scale manufacturing sense, is relatively new, and it's an immature market, and it's an immature industry. So there's a lot of change going along, and there's a lot of relationships and strategic relationships that are sort of being built and formed and tested and rebuilt. And there's some old players in there, like your VWs and your BMWs and Hondas, but there are new players there that changing the outlook of the whole globe, like Tesla, and I would suggest there are some huge new industrial, also new, not to say new, but new to us, industrial players out of China that are huge producers of volumes of EVs and high quality EVs and battery technologies that are also looking to participate in the global EV industry, and I think China really does see it as a great opportunity for it from an industrial perspective to engage with the rest of the world and supply the rest of the world with EVs, and they're pouring billions and billions of dollars into really good R&D and technology into both EVs and the batteries that go into them. But importantly, what is really quite interesting is, and I think it's the stuff that Tesla have been challenged with but have been able to do, is turning tech and good tech into something that can be mass produced on very efficiently. And so it's not just about having the new technology. You've actually got to invest in the new technology that can manufacture the new technology. So it's really quite interesting. But there's a lot of really good work in engineering and science is going on around the globe, including China. So I've sort of explained this slide, which is a bit complex, but on the left-hand side is essentially the raw materials suppliers, which is the guys that mine the material, or they take the material out of brines and salt lakes in South America, and they produce lithium chemical. So on the far left is a list of raw material lithium producers. In the middle, essentially, is the battery manufacturers, and these are trying to draw the relationships, if you like. There's battery manufacturers, there's cathode manufacturers, so sort of the guys that produce the inputs that go into the batteries, and then on the far right you've got the OEMs that manufacture the EVs. So there's a whole bunch of new relationships that are being formed. China had traditionally, sure.
Just quickly, is gang friend mentioned a few times just for the sake of the diagram, or is it?
Well, they have a bunch of different relationships, and they're not singularly related necessarily to sort of one single sort of mid player in the supply chain. And they often, and what we'll see is that the market is still relatively small, and so you have a relatively small number of players controlling parts of the supply chain or having a major role in the parts of the supply chain. So that's sort of quite interesting, if you're interested in economics and how industries sort of evolve. You've got, the car industry that's been going for 120 years is trying to change in 10 or 15 years, and all that supply chain that goes with that is going to change as quickly as possible. It's really quite interesting. But what we do see in a general sense is you've got raw material production coming out of, particularly for lithium, out of South America, which is roughly about half of production. Australia, which is about half the world's production. Most of that then goes to China for processing, for chemical processing, and then those products get distributed through Korea, Japan, and into Europe to make lithium batteries, and then to the EV manufacturers themselves. Next slide, please. And to do that, you've got to form all these different relationships. So the car manufacturers have had relationships with the guys that produce tyres and seat belts and whatever else for decades. And they've been really sort of refined and low margins and high volumes and repeated relationships, and they've been able to really have those sort of tight and efficient supply chains. Whereas now these sort of the supply chains haven't been sort of developed in real time. So there's a range of relationships that are sort of being formed. From our side, as a seller of a product, we're looking to build relationships with the supply chain so that we can be sure of the income. We're going to invest in building this mine and processing facility. We're going to be sure that we can have buyers for our product. The other things we're looking for is finance to build the project as well. So they're the things that we're looking to from our side of the relationship. And then sort of further down the supply chain, which includes the converters and refiners, which are currently mostly in China, the cathode manufacturers that are in Japan and Korea, and then the battery manufacturers around the globe and the car manufacturers. They're all trying to build these relationships. Ideally, they're win-wins, but they're not always. Into how to sort of develop the supply chain, so the supply chain actually has the capacity to deliver the number of EVs that the world will need over the next few years and decades. Thank you. So I've got a map here on the left of Australia, which shows where the key lithium projects are around Australia currently. And here we've got a list of the current producers and a list here of what are likely to be the new producers or the developers on the right. So currently, the existing producers, and this small list, so there's 4 operations. Right, that represents half the world's lithium supply. Right, four mines, and 4 years ago it was one. It was Greenbushes. So the world's looking to try and grow and supply the world, and it's got to grow quickly. This whole supply chain's got to grow quickly to do that. So we've got Greenbushes, which is the sort of the largest and the oldest major lithium mine in the world. I'm not sure if I've got a point or anything like that. Big stick. No, I can probably do it physically. Yeah, so we've got Greenbushes here, so just south of Perth, just near Bunbury, if anyone knows the area. And so there's a huge high-grade lithium deposit there, and that's been mined for over 100 years for tin and tantalum, but for spodumene, which is the lithium mineral that most of the lithium comes from, for about the last sort of 20 or 30 years. Most of that historically for that lithium production actually wasn't used for lithium batteries. Lithium batteries is a new thing. It's really for ceramics and glass making. So that's where the traditional markets for lithium are. And so there's a range of standard products that came out of Greenbushes that were really designed for the ceramic industry. and then they've evolved to produce their products, which become standards for the battery industry. Over the last 5 years, there's been only a handful of new mines, but they still represent, as I said, more than half the world's current lithium supply. So you've got Mount Marion here, which is near Kalgoorlie, Mount Catlin, which is near Esperance, and Pilgangoora, which is near Port Hedland. So those guys, as I said, they represent over half the world's lithium supply. But the global lithium supply needs to grow 5 times in the next 5 years. That sort of metric. So these guys will continue to expand their operations, but there needs to be new supply. So that's where companies like Core, with our project adjacent to Darwin and Darwin Port, becomes the opportunity for South Australia, as a South Australian company, and for the territory to contribute and be part of the lithium battery and the EV supply chain. And then there are other projects in Western Australia as well that are aiming to get in production over the next few years. What is interesting is that many of those projects are co-owned and co-funded by sort of players in the industry further downstream. So Greenbush is joint owned. It's mostly overseas ownership between Albemarle, who are a North American group, and Tianqi, who are a Chinese group. Mount Marion, which is owned by Australian company Minres, but also has a big Chinese ownership there through Ganfeng. And Mount Catlin and Pilgangoora are Australian owned. But essentially what that sort of ownership comes from is really, and we've experienced that ourselves, is it's tough to get Australian institutions to dip into their pockets and invest in Australian mining projects. And as much as we would love to see Australia sort of value add to its mining projects, it is a tough ask to get Australian institutions to invest in local projects and to provide that capital to build the new industries that we need and the new manufacturing that goes along with that. So if it's not available in Australia, then the proponents of those projects go, well, where do we source those funding from? And then it comes from offshore.
So, sorry to interrupt. So why is that?
It's, I think it's the probably the scale of our financial markets, and so there's a level of risk in new projects, and so say Australian super funds or whatever else, they go, okay, well we have 90% of our funds which goes into very low risk projects, and we might have 10% that goes into higher risk projects. So all their money, most of their money goes into building office buildings, those sorts of things, and it doesn't go into mining projects which have higher level of risk, because you've got market risk and a whole bunch of other things. So I think it really comes down to two things: scale of our financial markets, but also pretty short-sightedness in regards to how investors are looking. They're looking for 3-month return, 6-month return. Long term is 1 to 2 years, whereas say particularly in places like China, the government works very closely with their corporates and saying, look, this is what we're trying to achieve over the next 20 years, and so they then invest and with a level of persistence to achieve those longer term goals. Whereas I think the Australian federal government's now just starting to wake up and go, we're going to actually own and sponsor this new manufacturing strategy, then it's actually got to put some guns behind it. So, the Australian sort of federal government money, but also I think it's to lean on the Australian financial institutions, so the banks and the super funds or whatever else, to actually invest alongside that strategy.
A prime example of that, my most recent super review, my advisors mentioned to go a bit conservative and was suggesting to cut out all Australian time with my super contributions, just cut it out completely.
Yeah.
So that's a prime example. I'm only 37 years old, so he's like,
Yeah.
well, if you do that, you get better return, rah, rah, rah. So it's a matter of choice, and a lot of people take the easy choice. So.
Yeah. So that's the sort of the practical response for not being able to access the capital domestically in Australia is that companies are willing to go offshore to find that, and those that have sort of longer time horizons or sort of bigger pools of funds can strategically position themselves into industry and get ahead of the pack.
What does a lithium mine look like? Is it a big open cut there? Or?
Yeah, it's not. Essentially, it's mining granite, so it's a lithium-rich granite. So it's a large open pit, or as Core is doing, as Core is planning, it's a combination of both. So it'd be an open pit mine down to 200 metres depth, and then going underground, which means you're moving less material, much more efficient in regards to the amount of material movements, but higher cost because of the methodology.
Hard rock, I presume.
Correct.
So you've got to blast it and crush it.
Yeah.
Lithium carbonate has been used for the treatment of bipolar disorder for over 50 years. Did that come from WA or?
I would suggest a proportion of it would have. What the other sources of lithium around the globe, essentially from brines from very salty lakes in South America. So up in sort of Chile, Peru. So that's the other source of supply, which represents about sort of 40% of global supply.
What about ethically choices made by super companies or superannuation? Do they look at mining lithium as being an ethical choice?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Apart from coal.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Because there's plenty of ethical choices with super funds.
Yeah. Is it that
They're all pulling out coal.
Yeah. Well, that's a key. It's a key driver for consumers of electric vehicles is emissions and reducing emissions. But also the financing industries, and particularly with messages from sort of European finance industry that it wants to be involved and support growth of supply chains that can contribute to reducing emissions. And even though lithium is seen, even though sort of mining can be seen as being sort of like a dirty industry, is that essentially you can't achieve those goals without investment in the raw material supply process. So, I mean, even though there is a small footprint of impact on physically on the mine, the whole supply chain in some ways, a consumer of an EV in Germany wants to see all the way through the supply chains and look through to where that product's coming from. And in some ways, what we're doing in Australia is very transparent in regards to the environmental processes that we go through, the social engagement, community engagement processes that we go through to get approvals and environmental approvals for our projects. Whereas, there aren't, the competing suppliers around the globe for lithium say out of the Congo in the middle of Africa, where those processes to get into approvals and get into production and get environmental approvals are simply less transparent.
Could you tell me the ratio of the mineral and the dirt, the earth? How many tons of earth do you need to create a ton of lithium?
Yeah, it's a good question. Essentially, like the industry works in a metric which is a lithium carbonate equivalent. So that's how sort of the measurement goes. And essentially, you need 8 tonnes of ore to produce 1 tonne of lithium carbonate equivalent. Okay.
I think we'll just let you continue your presentation
sure.
for a while now, and we'll have
Yeah.
questions again at the end, okay?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just give a couple of sort of slides about sort of what we're actually doing, so you get an understanding of what the South Australian company is doing. So we have our office here, but we're essentially looking to build Australia's next lithium project just outside of Darwin in the Northern Territory. We're arguably Australia's most advanced new lithium project, and really our aim is to achieve a final investment decision on the project later this year and start construction activities on the project by the end of this calendar year. And that'll be the culmination of 6 years of investment and dedication to the project to get to that point. We've been through a full 2.5 years EIS process with the Northern Territory Government, with all the requisite and appropriate social engagement as part of that. We've got good, strong support from the Northern Territory Government. We've got good communications, and indeed they've offered us a small debt finance piece to actually sort of attract that investment and bring forward the project. Interestingly enough, we're an ASX listed company. Certainly been a lot of investment interest coming back into the sector and into core more recently, and particularly around an offtake deal that our largest shareholder and our offtaker has done recently with Tesla, where a group called Zhejiang Yahua, who are one of China's largest lithium producers, signed a 5-year supply agreement to supply Tesla with lithium hydroxide for 5 years, and we would be the supplier of lithium to Yahua. We're supplying them with lithium concentrate, and then they were producing that lithium hydroxide out of that carbonate and supplying that to Tesla. So we're very likely to become part of Tesla's supply chain in the future. And the project, as we build the project, we'll look to grow in life and become a long-term supplier of lithium out of the Northern Territory. Thank you. There's a couple of key advantages that the project has, in that we're developing some of Australia's highest grade lithium resources only 25 kilometres away from the port, but also it's within 45 minutes drive from the suburbs of Darwin. So there's a lot of savings on sort of infrastructure that we can utilise, roads, housing, all that infrastructure that's around the capital city that we don't need to build. And the other key advantage that we have, which is a more technical one, is that the mineralogy of the ore bodies that we're working with enables us to produce a high quality lithium concentrate through simple gravity separation. So essentially it's a non-chemical process. So we mine the lithium rich granite, we crush that up, and we can separate it using density between the quartz and feldspar, which is the waste, and the spodumene, which is the valuable lithium. Thank you. So the project itself, here, Finniss Lithium Project, it's on the south side of Darwin Harbour. This is Darwin CBD, Darwin International Airport, and importantly Darwin Port, which is Australia's most northern port and the closest port to markets in Asia for our product of any Australian project. Importantly, the mine, so this is a different view, the mine is connected by a high quality sealed road all the way to Darwin Port, so it's very efficient for transport of the material, and we're probably trucking about 8 truckloads a day when the project will be up and running, from the mine to Darwin Port, and then off to markets, most likely in Asia. As I said before, we benefit from having residentially a workforce that's 45-minute commute away from the project. We don't need to build airports. We've got an hour's drive from Darwin International Airport, so it's very easy to get to. And interestingly enough, one of the key pieces of infrastructure in the area is a heavy industrial park. here at Middle Arm, which is halfway between the mine and the port, where there is a number of heavy chemical producing facilities there at the moment, and we're keen to work with the state government, with the territory government and the federal government to look at opportunities for downstream processing and chemical manufacturing at Middle Arm to sort of add value to our product and bring as much value to domestically to what we're doing in the future as well. Oh, sorry, I'm clicking here. I just pointed at you. As I said, we're potentially going to be joining Tesla's supply chain through an offtake that we have with one of China's largest lithium producers, a group called Zhechuan Yapwa. Where Yapwa will supplying Tesla with lithium hydroxide for 5 years. Yapwa are our largest shareholder, and we've got a binding offtake with them to supply them with spodumene concentrate, which represents about 40% of our production from the project. We still have, that gives us about 60% of our production, which is currently uncontracted. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there is now a whole world of parties that are desperate to get access to lithium from a low risk first world jurisdiction that's got sort of transparent sourcing. So we're in a really good position now where we're dealing with some of the biggest guys both in the EV manufacturing space, in the battery manufacturing space, the cathode manufacturing space that are really keen and to secure supply of lithium for the future. So we're in a really good position now where we've got a project which is near construction ready. The price of the lithium is increasing again, and we're engaged with some of the largest players in the EV supply chain at the moment that are looking to source lithium from us to build batteries for EVs in the future. Yes, I think that's it. Thank you.
Right, questions?
Yeah, sure.
In regards to your locality there, is there any thought being put into ferrying or anything like that to speed up the process? Is there even a necessity for that?
Yeah, there are some efficiencies. The challenge is that if you look to sort of interact with the marine environment with any project, there's a whole shitload of complexities and issues that sort of get raised. Whether they're material or not is a different one, but as soon as you engage in the marine environment, it's tough.
On the ASX today, you've got an announcement that you found gold.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that sort of tied up with this, or is that another?
It's very close to it. It's probably sort of it's within 5 k's of where the first lithium mine will be. And it really just came out of the fact that we've got a whole bunch of geologists running around looking for lithium, and
tripped over this gold.
and sort of over that process over the last 4 or 5 years, we've sort of picked up interesting because we throw the rocks in for analysis of the chemistry. And over a period of years, we go, geez, actually these are consistently high in gold as well.
1.6 kilometre rock.
Yeah. And so only it's probably about 3 or 4 months work we did towards the end of last year was that we literally picked up 100 gold nuggets through the area, and it's quite a rich gold area. It's much earlier stage than the lithium, but it could be exciting.
So that would continue, obviously.
Yeah.
And the gold mine actually is still running or not? They open up and shut down quite often.
Yeah, so that area, the Northern Territory's produced close to 5 million ounces of gold historically. So that's a if you times that by
So they're digging at the moment?
$3,000 an ounce. Mate.
Are they digging at the moment? Because I know they shut down when the price drops too much. So.
Yeah, they do. No, the gold price is relatively high, so there's a lot of new gold mines being.
Is there much happening with recycling lithium from old batteries? And the second question is, has there been much recent progress in on battery fires?
Yeah, it's a good question, because that's where the sort of the industry and the cycle will go to is about recycling. There's Australian company here called Neo Metals who they did invest in Mount Catlin as a mining project, and they've actually now reinvested that money into developing recycling technologies. But I was talking to the chap who runs that company. He's telling me interesting stories about, because they've got to crush this, all these batteries up, and you know what batteries are. They're a very compact, efficiently compact store of energy. So in that process of trying to crush them up to separate the plastic from the steel, from the battery sort of thing, there's you have this big, heavy crushing equipment, this big steel stuff that's going around, but you hit the right battery at the right time, and it'll blast off huge chunks of sort of solid steel from this machinery. So that's one of the challenges is but so that's definitely going to be part of the future of the whole industry. Is it's currently the world will be focusing over the next sort of 5 to 10 years of creating enough supply, but that's definitely what the world will be looking for as well, is how do we get efficient about recycling what we take out of the ground.
Design it in up front.
How much lithium does the world have? We've got plenty.
There's certainly enough. But it's like iron ore or copper. There's enough in the earth to supply, but it's all about having it in the right place, in the right form, and close to infrastructure, so that the costs of actually producing it, distributing it around the globe, are competitive.
How many jobs does it support, and what's the relationship with the traditional owners of the area?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so we're looking to employ between 200 and 250 full-time jobs for the project, so new jobs for the territory directly. And the economic studies suggest there's going to be about 150 sort of indirect jobs in the territory as well that sort of come through that. We're engaged with the Larrakia, the local traditional owners in the area. We're trying to get them involved as much as possible, commercially in the project, and be sort of positive in our sort of cultural impact socially in the area as well.
You can do sort of like the super pit in Western Australia. The gold might sort of have just a bigger spiraling sort of cone that sort of goes down and then eventually runs out, or you have to do tunnels and bore.
Yeah, it's essentially a mix of that. Yeah, most open pit mines have the same sort of concept, which is you sort of you dig a hole and you need to have a road that goes around the edge of it that you haul your material out of.
Yep.
And then there's basically sort of like a cost benefit, something that's sort of calculation that goes, okay, well, I can get past this depth, it costs you more than it does to then it's to send a tunnel down and mine it underground.
So how big do you imagine your pit would be before you end up tunneling?
The pit that we plan is be about 500 metres by 400 metres in size, like length width, and about 200 metres deep.
So 200 metres is not long, is it?
Well, correct. It's all relative. So you can have iron ore pits that go down a kilometre or
Dan?
So does Core Lithium own, or has purchased the land, or is it renting the land, like the old school prospecting lease type thing? How's that work?
Yeah, the sort of the tenure system, so you start with an exploration licence typically, which enables you to sort of run around and drill holes and do sort of tests and surveys, and then you apply to the government for a mining licence, so which is a different level of approval, and then you need also what's called in the Northern Territory an MMP, which is a mine management plan, which is essentially the approved operations, so what the activities that you can undertake. And it's not just the activities; it's all the environmental science and engineering that goes behind the impacts of those activities and how you manage those.
And if I may get a bit more detail on that question, So in regards to say one of those leases, etc., if you specify that you're taking lithium and you happen to stumble across that you did gold, for instance, is that also covered, or is that only new leases? Is that
Yeah, typically in Australia, so the mineral leases are for all minerals. Yeah, so it's whoever owns or is the controller of the licence has the rights to all the minerals. But from time to time, commercially, companies sell rights off for different purposes. And the land that we're working on is it's vacant crown land.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's territory.
What was the process with the Larrakia people in coming to, mine there? What was the process that you had to go through, if any?
Yeah, essentially was there's no native title claim in the area, but we've engaged directly with the Larrakia people, with the Larrakia Development Corp. So we see them as key stakeholders, even though there's no legal native title, that they're still key stakeholders and part of the community that we want to provide benefit to and engage with. So we're just sort of doing that for 2 things that I think that.
Any more questions? Well, I'll ask the obvious one. I think I've asked you this before. Potential to use electric vehicles in the mining operation.
Yes, yeah.
And the gentleman from Zero Electric Land Cruisers over there is probably interested in that too.
Yeah, we have looked at that, and my chief operating officer was actually about 2 days from sort of heading on a plane to an electric vehicle mining conference in Sweden at about this time last year. So definitely we're looking at it. Bringing in renewables where we can. There's probably more efficiencies in the underground mining currently with current technologies for underground mining, which is part of what we're doing. But across the globe, not just for lithium, but the mining industry itself is investing in a lot of R&D into electric mining equipment and into automation. So we'll be looking to try and do that if where we can.
Any last questions? Right. Would you like to run that video?
You'll give it a crack.
Yeah.
What excites us about the future of Core is contributing to a low emission environment. Demand in the global lithium market is not an if, it's a when. And Core Lithium is in a good position to seize that moment when it presents itself. While others have struggled in the past 3 years, Core has timed its run well. We're construction ready, actively resource drilling, and we're well positioned at the right time as the lithium market recovers.
Core Lithium is the most advanced new lithium project in Australia, and it's on track to become the country's next lithium producer through the development of its Finniss lithium project in the Northern Territory. Core owns a large 500 square kilometre area of exploration tenements full of lithium-rich pegmatites across the Bino pegmatite field near Darwin, the Territory's capital. This close proximity to Darwin and the Middle Arm Industrial Precinct brings substantial infrastructure advantages for the Finniss project, including access to grid power and gas. In addition to a cost-efficient freight route to Darwin Port, existing road infrastructure also provides access to the city's workforce, as well as other valuable skills, trades, workshops and services. Core proposes to mine spodumene, a lithium-containing material using conventional open pit and underground methods, commencing at the high-grade Grants deposit. Recent exploration and resource drilling has doubled the life of mine, and we expect to continue to increase our reserves to become a long-term producer of high-quality lithium from Northern Australia. High lithium grade and outstanding metallurgy of Core's resources enables the company to produce a quality lithium concentrate using simple DMS gravity processing. This makes Finniss one of the most capital efficient and cost competitive lithium projects in Australia. The lithium-rich pegmatite will be crushed and processed on site by a 1 million tonne per annum DMS gravity processing plant to produce a high-quality lithium product with healthy margins. Following the achievement of first production at Finniss, Core expects to generate in the order of $160 million in annual revenue over the course of the project's initial mine life, resulting in a high return on investment. The finished product will be shipped out of Australia's nearest export port to Asia, destined for Core's offtake partners in the lithium battery supply chain all over the globe.
The Finniss Lithium project will be one of the most capital efficient lithium projects in Australia. We have the advantage of being less than an hour by road from Darwin Port, the closest port to Asia. We have a workforce located 45 minutes away and the ability to tap into key utilities. We don't need workers' camps or airstrips or generators, and we have ample water supply from a previous project on this space. That gives us a significant financial head start. Another key advantage is the quality of our lithium. We can avoid a significant amount of refining expense because of the quality grade of the rock at Finniss. At Core, we know that ESG is an important consideration, and so it could be, especially when you're in the business of creating a renewable energy source. We are leading in environmental processes, with some of our on-site electricity able to be renewably generated. Core is very respectful of the traditional owners of the land and the local community living in and around Finniss. We have been and will continue to engage with these groups in an appropriate and transparent way at each stage of the project.
We're really excited in Darwin Port and Landbridge Group to have Core coming on. We're fully supportive of Core and their ambitions for great exports and also great job opportunities, and that certainly benefits all of the territory and the port itself.
In a post-COVID world, the desire for renewables is only growing. As the EV market grows as well, commodity prices like lithium will only rise. What sets Core apart is a steady sense of inertia. We've delivered on key milestones on a regular basis. In the last year, we've achieved full government approval, signed new European offtake and Asian offtake agreements, and increased our resources by 50% and reserves by 150%. We've had extensive conversations with interested parties from all over the globe and all parts of the lithium supply chain. It's an agile industry and it's very exciting.
I'm sure you all join in thanking me for Stephen. That was a pretty fascinating background story. We often don't think, we just think we've got our EVs and that's it, without thinking of all the new supply chains that have to be developed to make that possible. So that was really interesting. Thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you.